You're listening to Two Girls, One Crossword.
We watched Titanic, people. Is that something that we even talked about doing on the podcast? I feel like that might have been a off-the-record
conversation
plan that we had. But anyways,
we
yes,
have talked about Titanic-related things on this podcast, though, so...
Did we talk about the submersible? Because basically after that happened, I really wanted to watch the Titanic again because I hadn't seen it since it came out, or a few years after it came out. I think I was like in 4th or 5th grade because we had it on VHS. And we had the 2 VHS tapes because the movie's like 3 hours long. But I hadn't seen it since then, so we watched it last weekend. We had some friends over, and unbeknownst to Chelsea and I, 2 of our friends are like Titanic experts. They love the movie. They were, when Hannah was like, didn't like Richard whatever like discover it in 1950, we were like, how do you know that?
And she's like, oh yeah, and he still has the rights to the salvage rights, and we're like, what are you talking about? And Michael, the whole time, he's got like Titanic facts. He's like, oh yeah, they shot this in reverse and they flipped it in post because the Titanic was technically on this side of the pier, not that side of the pier. And we're like, he's like, oh yeah,
I loved it though. That's the best way to watch a movie.
It was perfect commentary, but it was one of those things where it's like, well, are people gonna have fun like if we suggest doing this? And then they're like, oh, this is my favorite movie of all time, and Michael watches it like multiple times a year.
It wasn't the original plan. We were supposed to go to the beach. For all our listeners wondering, we were supposed to go to the beach, but then the weather was awful. So I was like, everyone just come to my place instead. I was like, maybe we could watch Titanic. Threw it out there, thinking that people would turn it down. But no, it was the perfect audience for it. And I have to say, the movie was excellent. Why are more people talking? Just kidding. It was like Oscar award winning. But yeah, it was very good.
Why is nobody talking about the Titanic?
There's this movie you may not have heard of.
I am glad we watched it. I, thankfully, as all of our listeners know, I've got a thing with like open sea and like boats and like sinking and like being eaten by sharks and like all the stuff. And if you didn't know that, well, listen to literally any of our episodes and I'd probably bring it up at least once. But I got to the point where the boat starts sinking, and then Matt and I had to leave to like go take our dog out, and it had hit like the 4-hour, 5-hour mark or something. We had to get home, and I was like, whew, dodged a bullet with that one. I don't have to see all the horrible stuff.
But Matt finished it at home.
But yeah, as soon as we finished walking Neptune, Matt sat down at his computer and put it on, and I was like,
I can't believe you didn't finish it.
I have no desire to.
It's so sad at the end. Alex, who like didn't watch the movie, just watched the end, and she was crying, like sobbing at the end because it's so sweet. But sad.
Well, that's the thing is like I feel things so much that like I felt like I was on the boat with them. Like I felt like I was sinking, and I'm like, the woman who tucks her kids into bed. These are things I remember from seeing it like 20 years ago.
And the old people who just like go to sleep and yeah. But it's like, how does that work? Then it's not like water rushes in fast. I mean, it kind of trickles in, so you're just
I know. They're just making it cinematic. But yeah, I think we talked, you know what it was, Grace? After the submersible, we didn't talk about it on the podcast, but you texted me that you wanted to watch Titanic. And I was like, oh, and I've been seeing all this James Cameron stuff on TikTok about how he like did the test with Rose and Jack on the boat. And remember how he went to Challenger Deep or whatever with his submersible. And you're like, I totally forgot that James Cameron was a deep sea diver. Right. And it's like not just like a diver, but like he builds the submersibles. It's wild.
We were laughing because it was like that's like his number one priority is like deep sea exploration. I think he funds like a research study, and it's like his job to fund that happens to just be an Oscar award-winning director. Just like the craziest, like, I just need a job to fund my hobbies. Let me
exactly
do this.
Well, it's all working out for him, and I'm glad it is. I do like the film Titanic. I do. It's just I have a hard time with really sad things, especially out on the open seas.
That's fair. Well, I feel like we actually have talked about, I mean, it is topical for our podcast because you did the Marianas Trench.
Oh, yeah.
And didn't I talk about the unsinkable Molly, or I talked about someone at some point
that was on the Titanic or something. I can't remember. It's hard sometimes, listeners, to remember all of the topics we've ever done. Sometimes I pick a topic and I'm like, wait, we've done this and we haven't. And I like shock myself that we haven't.
That happens to me all the time. Maybe it's like we mention it in a topic, but I feel like every time I have a new topic, the rest of my old topics like shift and one falls off.
It's true.
You know?
Yeah,
So.
it's like a Rolodex. It's like, it's going.
Yeah.
You're losing one.
Anyways, that's quite the introduction. But yes, this is not a Titanic podcast. It is Two Girls, One Crossword. I'm Grace Topinka.
This is your favorite weekly Podword Crosscast. I'm Chelsea Rowan. Thanks for listening again. Yeah, if you're interested in a Titanic podcast, let us know. Who knows?
Talk about, because we have done a like deep dive movie podcast on The Sound of Music, which was also based on a true story. I feel like we really could get into it with the Titanic.
We could have Michael and Hannah on the podcast. Are you kidding me? Michael
they really
have
should
all the
have
facts.
Us,
Yeah, well, they should do it, and then we could just be there for fun.
But maybe that already
everything.
exists, a Titanic podcast.
I'm sure it does, yeah. Or at least there's episodes of other podcasts that talk about the Titanic. I'm surprised that like things like Last Podcast on the Left hasn't done like the Titanic, because sometimes they don't do just like horror or like scary things. They do like tragedies as well. So anyway,
icebergs are scary.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
No. That's all I got. I was just thinking about icebergs.
I've Pullapalooza pulled up already.
Let's
ready
move
to go.
away from the iceberg to the Polberg.
Right. Well, last week I talked about Pinocchio. So on Twitter I asked which of these classic Disney movies is your favorite, and these were
question.
Like some of the top 5 earliest, or these were all in the top 6 earliest Disney movies that came out.
Nice.
And the choices were Snow White, Pinocchio, Dumbo, or Bambi.
Oh, which I've also talked about Bambi on the podcast.
Right. I know. Now we just need to do Snow White and Dumbo.
Yeah.
In first place, tied was Snow White and Pinocchio. Okay. And then in second place was Dumbo. And then no one voted for Bambi.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Not that many people voted on this one, but
I'm trying to think what I would have voted for. Because here's the thing. I've got like opinions about Disney films, which is like ridiculous. I don't know why I care. But I feel like of these options, I would pick Snow White, but I feel like Snow White and like the rest of the princesses, even like the early princesses, like it's like a different,
category.
Whereas like in like the non-Disney princess films, I probably would pick Bambi.
I'm trying to think of like what I watched the most as a kid. And I feel like I watched Pinocchio more. And my sister liked Dumbo a lot. So
I really like Dumbo, but that is such a sad movie.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Like, but
yeah,
I also watch Jungle Book a lot. Like, a lot.
How old is Jungle Book?
I don't know, but I think it is one of the older ones, but I don't think it's like one of the like Snow White older ones. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know.
I feel like I didn't watch the ones that were too old. Like I was very much into Peter Pan, Lion King, that type of vibe. But there is a funny story in my family. My mom like heard my sister sobbing and like ran to see what was going on, and she was watching Dumbo and just crying. Poor thing.
Yeah. That is sad. Dumbo is very sad. But all of those are classics. I'd love Pinocchio, but Dumbo is so good because it's sad. Snow White's great because
funny to think about like what is in these kids movies then, and like we talked about in Pinocchio last week that would never fly now.
I know
But it's like they turned out okay. I don't know.
I think I turned out fine, right? Who knows? Anyway, before we move into Hitch and Shits, I've got a corrections corner.
Tell us.
A listener wrote to us, Emma. Thank you for writing. I'm actually just going to go right to my Instagram messages because did a great job of explaining. So last week I talked about St. Patrick, and there's like a lot of religious history wrapped up in St. Patrick. And there was a moment where I think, Grace, you asked, like, is he Catholic? But also, so I'm just gonna, first of all, was St. Patrick Catholic? Yes and no, apparently. This is kind of what I thought was the case. I was like, I don't know if the Catholic Church was around in the way that we know of it as like an institution. Anyway, so yes and no. Before 1054, there was no such thing as Catholic. Everyone was just Christian. But the Christianity he practiced did evolve into Catholicism. In 1054, there was the so-called Great Schism that split the Roman Catholicism from Eastern Orthodoxy. After that, various Protestant denominations came along starting in the 16th century. So, yes, apparently after this 1054 date is when Catholicism came around as we know it. But before that, everyone was just Christian, but Patrick was going around doing like vaguely Catholic vibey things, apparently.
Right.
So,
okay, that makes sense.
So there's that. And I think also I misspoke last episode, which the thing that I misspoke about is like horrifying to me because I feel like regardless, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just me, but if you have any high school history, like knowledge about religion, and maybe because I went to a Catholic high school, you knew that like in 300 is when the Romans became Catholic, or not became Catholic, but like it became decriminalized in Rome to be Christian or whatever. But okay, so apparently I misspoke, and I said that Constantine made Christianity the official religion in Rome in 1313 BCE, which is way in the past. Like
Doesn't
we're talking,
make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And this is off by 1626 years. So that's crazy. He decriminalized the practice of Christianity in 313 CE, so Common Era. And it wasn't until 380 CE that Emperor Thaddeus made it the official state religion. So yes, it was decriminalized in the early 300s, and then later that same century, it became the official religion. So.
Right. I feel like I do remember you saying BCE, and I was like, huh. But I didn't say anything. So I should have said something, because then you would have been oh, I meant this.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I misspoke, and thank God for our listeners, because even upon re-listening, that is not something that I would pick up for sure, because I'm like looking at the audio levels. Thank you, Emma. And again, we like our corrections corners actually, because it makes us feel like real people. So
yes, we love when people reach out to us. It's like, I know people are listening to this podcast. I see it on the
exactly,
on where we host, but yet we don't want to get too many people reaching out to us. Not saying that you have to. I'm not trying to guilt anyone.
Yeah. And I think we like to make sure that we're providing correct information. So if you ever hear something that is wrong, please let us know, because we want to correct that. It's not like we're trying to never correct ourselves. So
we are not experts in any way, shape, or form at all.
At all. You're lucky you get us in this chair every week. I'll just tell you that now. I'm not even an expert at life. So that's my corrections corner. Should we go into our hits and shits?
Sure. I'll start us off with the Thursday, August 10th New Yorker by Caitlin Reed.
Do it.
13 across, in quotes, "You don't believe me? Would I lie?"
Would I lie? Or no, what does she say? Did I
lie? 43 across, blank in the blank. It was like, underline a blank in the blank, and it was fill in the blank, but I thought that was just clever.
Oh, cute.
Was, 44 down, screwdriver, ? And the answer was libido.
Oh, that's good.
And then I didn't know this, but 46 down, Sir Blank Hercules John, and it was Elton. What a name. Elton Hercules?
That's amazing.
Is that his real name?
It's gotta be. It's in a crossword.
Yeah, I mean, that could be his real name now, but like, was that his given name?
God-given name upon entry into this earth.
Hercules, strong middle name.
Strong. Parents knew what they were doing with that, if that's big, if true. I'll just say that. Big if true.
That's all I got from that one.
Okay, cool. I'm going to take us to the Monday, August 7th New Yorker by Cameron Austin Collins, 20 across, pompous blank. And the answer was ass. Just thought it was
nice.
Funny. 35 across, how bwahaha sounds. And the answer was evil, which is kind of funny. 39 across, I was actually just having a conversation about this with some people. Means of presenting both sides of a story, and the answer was split screen. And do you remember like playing video games split screen back in the day? Yes. Like Mario Kart. And First of all, how like revolutionary it was that we could play video games with multiple people at once, right? Like you could play like not Call of Duty or like what's it called? Halo, split screen. I guess you could play Call of Duty split screen, like Mario Kart, all of that. But we would play split screen on these like tiny ass screens. Have you played split screen recently? I think the last time I played split screen was like, it wasn't even with you. I don't know if it was. Maybe it was with when we play Mario Party. Is it split screen?
Yeah, but we don't normally play. Because we don't do the racing games on there.
Right. So it's been a while since I played split screen, but like, it must be very jarring. Anyway, just like a retro throwback for our video game playing. 4 down. Implement for making a bow chicka wow wow sound on guitar, and the answer was wah pedal, which I just love these clues. They're fun. And then 12 down, small energetic type. And the answer was toy terrier. Isn't that cute?
Oh my gosh. Cute.
Yes. That's what I have from that puzzle.
Well, I'll take us to the Wednesday New Yorker. We're having a New Yorker episode. Wednesday, August 9th by Patrick Barry. 17 across, overhauls by means of mobile technology as an industry. Called Uberizes, which just thought that was interesting because Uber did like take over, the taxi industry. 23 across, time management ? But time is italicized, so it's like the publication. So the answer is editors.
Cute.
40 across, overconfident Aesop character, the hair, which just reminded me of the Aesop topic that we did.
Which was a good topic.
62 across, message sent by the Titanic. SOS.
Oh my god.
And then this is one that, I don't know, maybe you've heard of this one since you know more about film, but 20 down, question posed when holding a racket in a trope. And the answer is tennis anyone? So this, I looked it up on, thefreedictionary.com. Tennis anyone is an expression of indifference to matters beyond or outside of one's own sphere of concerns. The phrase was popularized in plays in the early 20th century as a jab at the upper class who cared little or not at all for the problems afflicting those in social classes beneath them. Today, the phrase is used more commonly in article and book titles about tennis, primarily heard in the UK. So this is an example. Of course, these working class commoners want more from us. It's in their nature to have such notions of entitlement. Quite appalling, really. Anyway, tennis anyone? But apparently it was used in like old movies. Like I read something about your friend Humphrey Bogart saying that in something, but
interesting. I don't think I knew that like in my brain, but as you're reading, I'm like, oh, I feel like I've seen this in a film or something, or like a TV show, like some rich white guy being like, tennis anyone? Whatever. The way you read it is great. It gave a vibe. Very transatlantic accent of you.
Well, yes. Anyways, learned something new. That was all I had from that one.
Very good. I did the Tuesday, August 8th New Yorker by Natan Last. Sticking with the New Yorker. I do have one New York Times, by the way. But from this puzzle, I liked 24 across, one with a leg up in a cast, perhaps, ? And the answer was Nepo Baby, which is hilarious. Nepo babies are quite popular right now. 27 across, just having some fun, say. This reminded me of you doing a bit. When someone's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm just having fun. And I'm actually just doing a bit of some variety. 11 down, radio silence, ? Dead air. That's all I have.
I have some more from that one. I liked 8 down, like Bart Simpson perpetually, age 10. And then I liked 33 down, all the things blank said, a Tattoo song. It was She Said. I like that song. All the things she said. That song is gay, by the way, FYI.
It is gay, by the way.
Lesbian, I should say. 36 down, sleepy number, ? And the answer is hi-ho. Speaking of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Yes, okay, so actually, I looked that clue up because the way hi-ho is spelled was surprising to me. Mm-hmm. It's spelled HEIGH, HO. Mm-hmm. And, hi-ho, in my head, is either spelled HIHO or HIGHO. H-O. Anyway, the H-E-I-G-H spelling of high apparently comes from something for Old English. I didn't write it down because it ended up not being as interesting as I was hoping it would be. But it does come from Old English, apparently. And it's a very English-ism. Britishism, right. I should say.
Is Snow White British? I don't remember.
I've got not a clue.
She's not. Okay. And then 50 down in brackets.
She's a Grimm story, right? So she should.
Oh, yes. But
unless they took the
German.
story from English people. But yeah, exactly.
Well,
you've talked
is she
about
a Grimm story? She could be from someone else, too. I'm not sure.
Tell me your next one. I'm going to look up and see if she's a Grimm fairy tale. Because I think she is, but I don't know.
I almost was going to do
the Snow White?
Snow White? Or something. There was some other Disney one. I was like, I can't. I just did Pinocchio. But it's so interesting to like figure out the original story.
I know.
Okay, my last one was in brackets 50 down. They messed up here and it was sick. Like S-I-C.
Yep. So Snow White is a Grimm fairy tale. Okay. Written down in the early 19th century. The Brothers Grimm published it in 1812 in the first edition of their collection of Grimm's fairy tales. Numbered as 53.
All right.
Anyway,
there you go.
So now we know. Was that your last one you had from that puzzle?
That's the last one I have at all.
All right. Okay, this is my last puzzle from the Thursday, August 10th New York Times by Natan Last and the JASA crossword class. We got another one.
Yay. Wow, they're really churning them out this year.
Exactly. So I saw this and I was like, I've got to do this. Okay. So the theme was a lot of fun. Also, if you don't know, the JASA crossword class is something that Natan Last works with. It's an organization, I believe, in New York for elderly people to come together and write a crossword with a published crossword writer, and they get it published in the New York Times. It's amazing. Anyway, so this is like the second one we've talked about in like the last couple months. The theme. I'll start with the revealers. 60 across. With 62 across, Freudian concept of resisting temptation, or a hint to 4 squares in this puzzle. And the answer for 60 and 62 across was impulse control. And so if you know anything about Freud, this is you're going to basically be seeing the words id and ego. Those are the things that control your impulse control in 4 squares of this puzzle. So this is a rebus where you have the words id and ego in a single square in 4 different places within the grid. So, for example, 17 across. 1998 film featuring NBA star Ray Allen, and the answer is he got game. So ego is in that clue. And then crossing with that is 2 down, stored as supplies. And the answer was laid in, so id. So id is for the down answer, and ego is for a cross, and they're, essentially pushing and pulling for the impulse control. So that's why id works for one, ego works for the other, and they control your impulse, kids. Okay, next one is 18 across. Someone who sees the big picture, and the answer is moviegoer, which has ego in the middle. And then 10 down, ones who've answered yes, brides to be. So id is in there. And I'll read one more. 34 across, dish near a water cooler, ? This was so good. Office gossip, dish near a water cooler.
Amazing.
And then 6 down, title lyric that precedes, there'll be days like this in a Shirelles classic, and the answer is Mama Said. I don't know that song, but id is in that.
Days like this, there'll be days like this, my mama said.
I don't know it, but
there you
yes. Also from this puzzle, this is not related to the theme. 1 across, which is the opener, race that winds down in the winter ? And the answer is slalom, or so
right,
like winds down in the winter. Very good. 15 across, long line on a face. Unibrow. And then 36 down, its home is on the range. Frying pan. This is a really, really good puzzle. If you haven't done it, it's the Thursday, August 10th, New York Times. Sorry, I revealed the theme.
And she gave you all the answers.
And I gave you all the answers. But yeah, that's all that I have for this week's Hits and Shits.
All right, well, shall I flip the coin?
Let's flip the coin.
feel like I've been first lately, but
you really have. Let's see what the coin gods are going to give you this time. I'm flipping the coin.
Please. I actually don't really care to go first or second. There's not they both have their pros and cons.
Well, you're going first, so.
It's just more I feel special that I get chosen to go first. That's
sometimes it's like me 10 times in a row, and then this happens.
My topic comes from the Thursday, August 10th New Yorker by Caitlin Reed, 45 across, competition where one might stand for a spell, ? And the answer is B. I'm talking about spelling bees.
Cute. Oh, this is going to be a good one.
Yes, it's very interesting. But I don't know if you know this, but spelling bees are as American as apple pie. That's my opening sentence. I love that phrase. But they are really an American thing, and they started in the U.S.
You know what else started in the U.S.?
Tell me. A lot of stuff.
Cocktails.
Right. There you go.
I feel
debutante balls. Yes. Actually, no.
No, actually, yeah. No. That was very British. But cocktails is incredibly American. And that's because we started using ice here.
We love ice.
We love ice here. The Iceman from the Tudor family from Massachusetts, license plate number 1. If you remember any of our the Ice King, thank you. Anyway, okay, sorry. Spelling bee.
Have you ever competed in a spelling bee?
I have.
I did in elementary school, but not anything serious.
I got to the second round. It was official state, New Jersey state spelling bee. I got to the second round.
Do you remember what word you lost on?
Mortgage. I'll never forget. Mortgage. I should have known, but I didn't because I was really nervous.
Right.
My best friend at the time, made it to the third round.
That's huge. Well, we did it in elementary school. I mean, I must have been really young, but I remember a bunch of kids, including me, got knocked out with the word business.
Ugh. What grade was I in? I can't remember. I think I was in 7th grade or 8th grade, something like that. Anyway, that's it.
Too much pressure. Okay. Well, have you ever watched the Scripps National Spelling Bee on ESPN? Or maybe you've seen clips of that one kid spelling that it became a meme, the iridocyclitis.
I've seen the iridocyclitis, and I've watched clips. I don't know if I've ever sat and watched the whole thing, but I've seen chunks and just seeing how stressed these kids are, but also how freaking smart they are. And then also there is that Hey Arnold episode with the spelling bee that I remember and love. Anyway, yeah, that's what I got for spelling bees.
Right. I was going to say, you might have also seen the movie Akilah and the Bee, starring Keke Palmer, or the musical, the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, one of my faves. I've not seen that one. But either way, let's talk about how the spelling bee originated in the U.S. So I got most of my information from an article on bookriot.com called The History of the Spelling Bee by Nicole Hill. So this article talks a lot about Shalini Shankar, who is an anthropologist who wrote a book called Beeline, What Spelling Bees Reveal About Generation Z's New Path to Success. So I'm going to be talking about Shankar a lot.
Okay.
But Shankar says that the early spelling bees in the U.S. had, quote, the objective of standardizing language as part of a nation-building project. So spelling bees first popped up after the Revolutionary War. America had broken off from England, and now they wanted independence from British English specifically. So in 1828, Noah Webster published his definitive dictionary of American English, and Shankar said that dictionary emphasized the syllabification of our national language along with mastery of the rules of pronunciation and spelling. So basically spelling bees were used, regional spelling bees were used as a way to help drill these new spellings and new words into, kids' little minds. So even the difference between color and color, how Americans spell color and how the Brits spell color. But it kind of incentivized, gamified the practice of, learning these new American spellings for school children and also adults. And, Americans love competitions, so it was perfect for us.
And Americans love educational gaming if you listen to the Oregon Trail episode.
Right.
It does.
Yeah, it's the only way we learn is if it's part of, if we can somehow prove that we're better than other people. There's also a colonialism element to this, creating of the American language, creating a so-called correct language, and solidifying it as the national norm. So that's another issue. But we do talk a little bit about Native American languages later.
Interesting.
But why are they?
Can we tell them to listen to the Ebonics episode of what's it called?
You're wrong about?
You're wrong about. Listen to that because that talks a lot about colonialism and race with language in the United States specifically, if you want more of a deep dive on that.
Right. Okay, so why were they called spelling bees? Like, what do bees have to do with it? There's not like one official answer, like whoever came up with it said this, but this is just what people think, what makes most sense. Bee meant a social gathering or meeting of the neighbors. Like back in the day, Webster's Third New International Dictionary defines it as a party. Okay. So the early bees were primarily popular in New England, where they provided social events aligned with Puritan sensibilities. But then in the 1800s, this bee swept throughout the rest of the country. So it's kind of an organic spread of spelling bees around the country. There was no official rules. It was kind of like the judges of that specific bee decided, the rules.
What to do, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The National Spelling Bee began in 1925. So that's the one that has turned into, the big one that we know today that's televised. So that started in 1925. It was organized by the Courier-Journal in Louisville, Kentucky, and hosted by 9 newspapers from across the country. So it was newspapers who started the first spelling bee.
Yeah.
For this very first one in 1925, more than 2 million school children competed at the local and state level, just like you did.
Cute.
But I want to note that not all states were represented. So it's a national spelling bee, but it wasn't truly national because not all states were involved in this. But anyways, out of those 2 million school children, 9 advanced to DC for the national bee. The winning word, 11-year-old Frank Neuhauser correctly spelled gladiolus, a flower that he happened to grow in his garden at home in Louisville, Kentucky.
Cute. Good for Frank.
He died a couple years ago, I think, but the New York Times, in his obituary, they mentioned that was his word. And that he grew it in his garden. So
amazing.
Sweet. In 1941, the E.W. Scripps Company, which at the time owned hundreds of national newspapers, snapped up the rights to the National Bee, and then the competition grew like crazy from there. So, for example, in the 80s, there were 110 spellers, but in the 2010s, there were 275. So it basically doubled the amount of competitors in these bees.
Wow, yeah.
A large part of this growth had to do with the TV coverage of the event. So ESPN they did the first broadcast of the spelling bee. It was in 1994, and since then it has kind of switched between ESPN and ABC. I think they're probably owned by the same people. But the coverage is serious. So, it's on this big stage. It's in National Harbor, Maryland, and the middle schoolers who compete become celebrities. Spell-ebrities. Their hometowns, their families are covered like in the same fashion as athletes who are in the draft. I mean, they really take it seriously.
These kids, they're so cute.
Right. But there have been some growing pains, with how big the competition has gotten. So to compete in the national bee, you have to compete in a regional bee. But some regional bees only have like 25 competitors, while other areas may have hundreds, depending on how populated it is where you are. In response to this, Scripps created the RSVB program in 2018, which is an invitational program designed to provide an additional pathway to the national bee for students in highly competitive regions or regions that don't have sponsored regional bees.
Yeah.
So RCP applicants must be school spelling bee champions or former national finalists. And in the program's first year, 855 spellers applied. So people are like really trying to get onto this bee stage.
This looks good on your resume when you're applying at college. I won the National Spelling Bee with gladiolus.
Right. Forget about it. You're in anywhere.
You're in.
Okay, so what about the demographics of the winners? So in 2019, for the first time ever, there was an 8-way tie for first place. I kind of remember this. They were called like the Octo Champs. But
cute.
To give you an idea of like the demographics of champions, 6 out of the 8 winners were of South Asian descent. Leading up to 2019, 25 of the 31 previous champions were South Asian Americans. So, why is this? Well, there was a documentary that came out in 2018 called Breaking the Bee that talked about this specific community's embrace of the spelling circuit. So why do South Asian Americans make up a large percentage of spelling bee finalists when they only make up 1% of the overall U.S. population? Well, Breaking the Bee filmmaker Sam Rega pinpoints the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act as the beginning of the rise of South Asian spellers in America. Quote, "This act lifted race-based quotas about who could come and not come into the U.S. Subsequently, there was an influx of highly educated immigrants, especially from India, coming into the U.S. These families had a strong focus on education and raised their kids to also value education. These highly educated...
if this was the case.
Right.
I'm vaguely aware of this, yeah.
These highly educated immigrants arrived in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to meet the growing demand for STEM workers, and they found existing immigrant communities and they started families. Shankar says, quote, "Many of these individuals trained in the Indian Institutes of Technology and other extraordinarily competitive colleges and universities. They not only value education but prioritize academic enrichment over all else. They forego their own leisure and position educational accomplishment as the focal point of their children's lives." So basically this combination of education and competition is what's called a brain sport, which is the spelling bee is considered a brain sport. And you commit to it the same way you would commit to any sport that you were very serious about, that you want to be professional in. So there's also no doubt that the competition has gotten much harder than when Frank Neuhauser won with the word gladiolus.
Iridocyclitis, are you kidding me?
Right. These days, spelling bee competitors are essentially professional spellers training for this brain sport the same way you would train for the Olympics. So elite spellers train year-round through the local and regional bee cycles. They perform their own mock spelling bees online with speller social media communities. They hire coaches, a given if you want to make it to the national finals, you need a coach.
Yeah.
But this professionalization of the bee has also raised other questions, like who has the means to compete this way? So while the competition is fairly ethnically diverse, it is not economically diverse. That's like a whole issue. I mean, you basically need a lot of money and time to be able to compete in. And that's the same as like any, there's always barriers to entry for all of this stuff. Like you need the coaches and the training, and unless someone like takes you on because they see that you're
I think about like the small clips that I have seen of spelling bees is like the questions that the speller can ask to get information about the word, to like give them hints about how it's spelled, like origins of the words and like all of this stuff, like, oh, it comes from the Greek for whatever, and like that gives you a hint of like, oh, it's going to use these letters over these letters. And it's like, if you don't have if you're an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, and you don't have a coach, there's no way that you would be able to get that information just by going to the library. Do you know what I mean? And even then, like, even if you were like some sort of genius and able to glean that from a library book, like you have to be able to get to the library or have the time to get to the library, like especially if you're from a more impoverished family. So
exactly.
Interesting.
Well, this is a problem that the RSVB program hasn't helped. That was to kind of help more kids. Like that was, that new wild card pathway to the national finals. But the RSVB program requires spellers to cover their own travel, lodging, and participation costs. So that also doesn't work for that particular problem. I also don't have the answer to that problem, but just wanted to throw that out there as, a potential issue with the spelling bee. But these issues haven't stopped spelling bees from spreading around the world. However, interestingly enough, most spelling bees around the world are in English. That's because other languages have more consistency between sound and spelling. So spelling bee doesn't really make any sense. However, in English, a word's spelling doesn't always relate to its pronunciation. Like the 3 C's in Pacific Ocean are all pronounced differently.
Wild. Yeah, it's true.
Also, English has borrowed tons of words from other languages. So there is no consistency in spelling. Like quinoa comes from Quechua, which is a language spoken primarily in Peru. Banjo is borrowed from Mandinka, the Mandinka language spoken in Western Africa. So English is really specifically primed to kind of have a spelling bee because
spelling element. Yeah.
Right. Because it's crazy. The way we spell things. So one way you can test languages that are not suited to a spelling bee type of competition is competitive dictation, aka correctly writing down a word or passage spoken out loud. So this is some other countries have this type of spelling bee adjacent competition. For example, this type of spelling or competitive dictation works well in French because in French, some grammatical elements, like the conjugations of some verbs, appear in spelling but not in the sound of the word. Likewise, Chinese, a language that uses characters for words instead of an alphabet, requires intense study to master the language fully. Most people know around 4,000 characters, but the language contains upwards of 100,000.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, I've watched many shows, like, I've watched a bunch of Thai shows, and a lot of times when the children are in school and they're training for university, they have to take a Chinese language. Not Thailand, is it Taiwan? Maybe it is Thailand. I can't remember. But they have to take a lot of like Chinese language classes in school, and they have to learn. The goal is to learn 1,000 characters for their exam entrance. And I'm like, and they each the characters are broken down into parts, and it's like this word means this, and if you see this with that character, it totally changes the meaning. And I'm just like, wow, this is intense and it's impressive. But yeah, I was wondering if it would be like more of like character-based languages could have something like a dictation type competition.
Right. They can and they do.
They can and they do.
The spelling bee can also encourage learning languages that have dwindling numbers of speakers. So this is, I was talking about how American English was kind of erasing indigenous languages, but that now, for example, in Alaska, there is a spelling bee in Yupik and Unipiaq. Sorry for my pronunciation, but those are indigenous languages that, very cool. The amount of speakers are dwindling, but they're having spelling bees to kind of help connect the keepers of the language, like the older generations and young learners who want to, compete and learn this language. So
that's very cool.
And then same thing in Farmington, New Mexico. There's the Diné spelling bee for students of the Navajo language.
Very cool.
And finally, these competitions aren't limited to children either. There is a national senior spelling bee. So if you're a senior, you can either make crosswords with Natan. Is it Natan who does it?
Yes.
Or compete in a national senior spelling bee. But if you want to compete in the national spelling bee, here are the 8 steps according to Matthew Brown's research on what makes a national spelling bee finalist. So he basically went through like all the, past things that finalists have done. And this is
give me the tips. Because I'm going to be at the senior center practicing.
Right. Well, number 1, this is more for the the regular national spelling bee because it is start early. You have to be under 15 to compete at the national level. Wow. The youngest champion was 11 years old.
Wow.
But also you kind of have to do it multiple times because only 3 first-time winners have won since 1999. So you got to get in there early. Like start when you're 11 and you have, you know, a couple years to compete there.
That's crazy.
Number 2, an obvious one, study a lot. Most kids study for almost 500 hours during competition years.
That's crazy. How many hours in Overwatch do I have right now?
Okay, number 3, have some fun with it. More than 80% of competitors said that they relax by playing word games like Scrabble and Boggle.
I'm definitely not, I don't have the mind for spelling because my attention span is shite, but word games are relaxing to me. If there's not like you need to study to become a champion looming over my shoulder.
I know these poor kids. It's like, yeah, you can take a break from studying and relax. Go play Scrabble.
Right.
Okay, number 4, try studying alone. Finalists say that the month before the bee, they spend 60% of their studying time alone.
Okay.
Number 5, imagine it. 50% of finalists picture the word in their head while they're spelling it. Number 6, ask for the origin. Latin words tend to be spelled right 71% of the time. So you better hope that you get a Latin word. Ones with Hebrew roots are only spelled right 45% of the time.
Wow.
So your SOL.
Good luck, kids. Yeah.
Number 7, hope for the worst. Looking over the past 13 years of bees, they found that a speller was more likely to get a word right if the previous competitor made a mistake.
Ooh, makes sense. Learn from people's mistakes, your own or somebody else's.
And then the last step is to memorize some tricky words. The words metastasize, metonymy, and Weimaraner were the most commonly misspelled words over the last 22 years. Also, double L's tend to trip people up. They have messed up 83 finalists since 1996.
Wow.
So make sure you know your double L's, people.
Yeah. That's interesting.
That's it. That's all I got for you.
I would have been a great proficient.
I wouldn't have, but I do love watching these, like, they're just so adorable. I shouldn't say it, like, not in a diminutive way, because these kids are freaking geniuses.
They are, but it's also amazing and, like,
right,
endearing.
I just love brain athletes, because they're so nerdy. I wish I was nerdy in, like, a genius way. I am nerdy in that, you know, I have other issues, but they're not helpful to me in any way.
I know I just said I would have been a great proficient, but I actually probably wouldn't have been. I am known for my horrendous spelling. But part of the reason for that is my attention span is really bad, and I refuse to, like, revise. I refuse to review anything, whether it's an email. I won't read it again. I'll just write it and send it.
That's crazy. I have to read my emails a million times to make sure I didn't, like, accidentally put in, like, I hate you. You know?
Yeah, like a curse word in all caps. Yeah. No, I mean, like, your average email, like, to the people that I'm emailing all day, I'd never read them. Like, if I'm sending, like, an all-company email, I'm like...
You read it over, like, 30 times.
Hawking it. And then I'm, like, sending it to my boss. I'm like, does this look right? You know, and she's like, yeah, this looks great. I'm, like, reading it 10 more times. But, yeah, notorious. Like, even in college, and this is bad, I would get graded really well on, like, my essays. They're like, the content of this is amazing. You really need to revise before you submit this. And I'm like, I literally spent weeks on this paper. I can't read it one more time before I submit it. I'm just going to take the L on that. Yeah, no.
Who's making all these spelling rules? Freaking John Webster or whatever his name was?
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering, too, when you were talking about how East Asian people are kind of like a huge demographic of spelling. Did you say East Asian or South Asian? Might have been South Asian.
Yeah, I believe it's South Asian.
I was also wondering if there's, like, an element of, like, learning the language of English makes them a good contender for spelling bees, because sometimes I find that, like, the way English is taught to people who are learning English as a second language, they tend to have a better grasp of the grammar and the spelling of English than even I do, someone who's a native speaker. And I think that's pretty common. Because, like, usually when you're learning a language, you're learning the grammatically correct version of the language. And so you can understand the grammatical rules and everything. Mm-hmm. Like, I couldn't, I have an English degree and it's been years since I've studied English. I couldn't tell you a goddamn single rule in English. But I have friends who speak...
E except after C.
Yeah, exactly. I got friends who speak English as a second language, and they have rules lined up. And I've got, like, a friend who asked me a question. I'm like, well, that's not right. And I don't know why it's right. And he's like, oh, is it because of this rule? And I'm like, Google it. I have not a clue.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's crazy. Brings me back to my spelling bee days, the 2 days that I did spelling.
I can't believe you competed at the regional level. That's so cute.
Yeah, it was fun. Well, it was devastating also because I lost, but it's fine. My topic comes from the Monday, August 7th New Yorker by Cameron Austin Collins. 46 across. Craft in which one might do more than 60 knots per hour.
Crochet?
Macrame.
Oh, okay. Close.
Very, very. It's a good guess, though.
You don't really do knots, I guess, in crochet, but...
Right. But macrame you do. So we're talking about macrame today. Have you ever done macrame at all?
I feel like not.
There's a low barrier of entry to macrame, in my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I feel like what is considered macrame? Like, I've made those bracelets, the friendship bracelets, and that's technically knots. I think that could be considered macrame since you're just making knots.
Then I have done that.
But I'm not sure if that constitutes as macrame, but I feel like it should because it's just knots, right? Macrame gods, let me know. Anyway, we're talking about macrame, which I think is fun because Grace and I are into fiber arts. We like crocheting a lot, so let's do some more fiber arts, right? I was actually surprised at how little information there was about macrame, considering you've done knitting before. What was it? Episode 112, Nearest and Dearest. Nearest spelled K-N for knitting, and Dearest for Bambi, which I talked about on that episode. Anyway, there's a lot of information on knitting and not so much information on macrame. So let's just get through the basics. What is macrame? It is a form of textile produced by knotting, using knotting techniques rather than weaving or knitting. The word macrame might come from the Turkish word makrama, meaning napkin or towel. Others believe that the term macrame comes from the Arabic word migrama, meaning fringe. So, the primary knots that you might use in macrame, there are many, really, and it's kind of like up to you, the knots that you're going to use, or up to your pattern. But the basic knots of macrame are the square knot, also known as the reef knot, or forms of hitching, such as the half hitches. I know what a hitch knot is, or a half hitch is, because my boyfriend used to work on boats. And I was talking to him about macrame, and he was like, oh yeah, like we used to tie knots and like make things with rope on the boats all the time, like when we were bored or whatever, which is interesting. I'm going to come back to boats and macrame in just a bit. So, but when I was telling him about the types of knots, he was like, oh yeah, those are all knots that I know how to make. And I'm like, maybe you should get into macrame. He's like, maybe I should. So macrame can be used to make everything from wall hangings and plant hangers to jewelry, purses, and clothing items. You would use things like cotton twine, jute, hemp, or yarn. Those are common materials. And then embellishments like glass or wooden beads, as well as dyed threads, are also common. So, I already asked you if you tried macrame. Do you have any macrame in your...
I do. Hello.
Oh, right behind you. Can you believe? If you're watching on YouTube, she's got some macrame just hanging there on the wall.
I think that is, actually, I'm not entirely sure what that is.
It looks like it could have elements of macrame combined with either crochet or knitting, which is interesting.
Right, that was Alex's from a long time ago, but
you can combine textile arts, which is like a whole other art form. Anyway, so where does macrame come from? Humans have been tying functional knots since prehistoric periods, right? Like knots are vital to everyday life of a human.
You've always said that.
I have said that. Decorative knots, on the other hand, where do they come from? The origins of macrame is generally attributed to Arabic weavers during the 13th century who used decorative knots to finish the loose ends of hand-woven textiles. So think of like a rug, and you would do decorative knots at the ends of the fringes there, which might be why the word macrame could come from the word fringe from Arabic, which is interesting. That being said, some of the earliest recorded uses of macrame-style knots appear in carvings of the Babylonians and the Assyrians. These were fringe-like plaiting and braiding to adorn costumes. So, like, you'd have fringe, and you would braid it or plait it to give it more of an aesthetic vibe, if you will. I guess that's exactly what they were talking. They're like, this needs, like, something else. I'm going to braid it. Additionally, decorative knots and decorative knot tyings also trace back as far as the 3rd century in China on ceremonial textiles as well as wall hangings. We're going to come back to China at the end. So it's believed that the Muslim conquest of Spain is the reason macrame made its way into Europe. So very briefly, this was around 710 to 780 CE when the Umayyad Caliphate invaded and conquered the Iberian Peninsula, and their rule lasted until approximately the 13th century. Additionally, the Crusades into the East also brought crusaders into contact with macrame when which they would bring home to their wives and their servants in Europe. So European nuns who were traditionally experts in needlework and lace making, they would use their crafts to like make textiles that they would sell for the church. They were quick to recognize the benefits of this new type of handiwork. Macrame was a relatively simple craft to learn, and it offered a simpler alternative to complicated lace-making techniques. They began macrameing with finer material rather than thick wool, which was the traditional thing that you would use at the time. And they were able to create beautiful knotted lace in decorative panels that could be added to clothes or linens, which is interesting. So anyway, the art of macrame spread to Spain and Italy and through the rest of Europe. In England, it was introduced to the court of Mary II in the late 17th century, and Queen Mary taught it to her ladies in waiting. Macrame then became incredibly popular in the Victorian era. It adorned most homes with items of like tablecloths, bedspreads, and curtains. There was a popular book released during the time of the Victorian era called Sylvie's Book of Macrame Lace. It was published in 1882, and it showed how to, quote, work rich trimmings for black and colored costumes, both for homeware, garden parties, seaside ramblings, and balls, fairy-like adornments for households and underlinens, end quote. I think macrame is like the perfect addition to any Victorian home. We've talked a little bit about the Victorian era on this podcast, and if anything, there's like a flair for the dramatic in house decorating, you know? I think about the hearse episode a lot, and the Victorian hearses that you might have seen, and just the extensive decoration. So yeah, macrame kind of fits a vibe. Fits a vibe. In the 19th century, macrame became popular in Italy, specifically Genoa. So if you remember from what I just said like a couple moments ago, the Muslim conquest of Spain kind of brought macrame to Europe, and that spread to Italy, England, and other parts of Europe. It influenced a practice that already kind of existed, like macrame kind of combined with lace making. And if you're familiar with lace making, Grace, it's very similar to tapestry crochet in that like they use bobbins. So you have like 20 bobbins of lace, and then you use needles to kind of like weave the lace. Macrame influenced lace making in Italy, and the lace making was called punto e grappo. It's a type of lace that was made without bobbins. It was made with knots instead of kind of weaving with bobbins. So this is kind of like how macrame is not just macrame, but it's influencing other handicrafts as well, which I thought was pretty interesting. One reason that the art of macrame continued to endure through time was likely due to sailors. This is why we're coming back to boats. We're coming back to my boyfriend, okay? While not busy at sea, sailors would make macrame objects to be sold and bartered when they landed. 19th century British and American sailors made hammocks, bell fringes, and belts from macrame. And the sailors called this process square knotting after the knot they used the most. Sailors also called macrame McNamara's lace. So I'm like, we gotta get, and like there's photos of like men in the late 1800s, early 19th century, like sailors like doing like this fiber art like on boats and stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, and then it was probably considered actual art, like when men were like knitting, you know, would get a PhD in knitting or whatever.
Exactly. It's a shame how much like these things become just like, oh, this is like a craft, a handicraft. It's like this is an art form, right? But everybody likes to shit on things that women do. Anyway, Matt should start doing
for sure. If you already know how to do knots, it's like you're halfway there.
You're halfway there. I'm like, he should start by making us like plant hangers.
Right.
Anyway, nevertheless, the art of macrame did fade away with time, as lots of these kinds of art forms would ebb and flow over history. We saw that a little bit with the knitting, you know, kind of goes in and out of style. Same with crochet, comes in and out of style. But in the 70s, macrame's popularity surged for things like wall hangings, clothing, accessories, small jean shorts, or just small shorts, bedspreads, tablecloths, draperies, plant hangers, and other furnishings. Macrame jewelry was also popular. This is specifically a resurgence that's happening in the United States of America, mind you. I'm sure there is some resurgences as well at other places, but I'm talking largely about the US right now. You could use square knots and granny knots, and the jewelry would often feature glass beads, natural elements such as bone and shell. Necklaces, anklets, and bracelets were also popular macrame jewelry. Macrame at the time was seen as an anti-industrial symbol in the counterculture movement. They would use handmade crafts as a way to rebel against capitalism and mass production. Hippies used macrame not as just a way to connect with their own creativity, but also as a canvas to kind of express their radical sentiments. Let's see. But by the 80s, macrame was fading out of popularity again, only to once again be revived by the millennials. I see macrame literally all over the internet, likely because I'm involved in some form of fiber arts, but also I think it is really popular right now. Fiber arts in general is very popular right now. So it's, you know, you see knitting, you see crocheting all over the internet, you see macrame. Macrame today is very popular interior design, tapestry, plant hangers. It's also interesting to think that macrame hasn't really changed much with time. Macrame artisans are using the same knots and techniques that would have been used by the Victorians, by the sailors, by the queens, by the Arabic weavers. Like nothing really has changed, which I think is pretty cool. So if you're doing macrame, you're like Queen Mary II. You're basically the same thing.
You're royal.
You're royal. Okay, so since that was kind of like a shorter topic, I wanted to chat briefly on a different art form similar to macrame called Chinese knotting, or, and I tried to practice this word, the Chinese word for this is zhongguaji.
Okay.
Chinese knotting. It is a traditional Chinese folk art with strong ties to Buddhism and Taoism. While I'm talking about this, you should look up Chinese knotting so you can see what it looks like, because I know you're familiar with macrame, but Chinese knotting is very pretty, and I want you to see some of these pictures. So some characteristics of Chinese knots. The knots are made from a single length of cord and can be made into many different shapes. The knot is identical on each side as well as symmetrical. It has to be made by hand to be considered a Chinese knot. And each shape has its own symbolic meaning. The most common color used in Chinese knotting is red, which is a color associated with luck and good fortune in Chinese culture, but you can use any color, really. Charms, beads, and jade may be incorporated into a Chinese knot. Additionally, these knots are often very intricate, and sometimes they're double layered, so like knots on top of each other. Silk cording is the most widely used material, but you can also use cotton and paracord. Knots are often paired with tassels, which are created separately and then added later. So tracing the origin of Chinese knotting is difficult. There's little evidence of prehistoric Chinese knotting in existence today, but some of the earliest evidence of knotting is from bronze vessels, which are from approximately 481 to 221 BC. What we do know is that knots were used in China to keep records, especially in the government and record keeping, which I thought was pretty interesting. Like small knots meant small events, big knots meant big events, which I was like, that's crazy. It's very cool. Additionally, knots were used as totems and belief motifs. For example, there was a silk banner that was found, and the origin is from approximately 209 BCE to 9 CE, and it used forms of intertwined dragons as a double coin knot in the middle of a fabric painting. And then there was like the upper part of the fabric depicts ancient deities who were essentially like the initiators of marriage in China. And essentially this knot came to be known as the double coin knot, and the meaning is love. So this is a knot still used today, which I thought was interesting.
Sweet.
Knots eventually evolved into decorative art in China, beginning with the use of ribbon knotting and decorative knots on clothing. And then the art of knotting evolved over thousands of years and developed with more sophisticated techniques and patterns. During the Song and Yuan dynasties, which was from 960 to 1368, the Pan Chang knot was the most recognizable Chinese knot, became popular. And if you were to look up the Pan Chang knot, it reminds me a lot of the Celtic repeating pattern. You know what I'm talking about?
Right. I was even just looking at like when I was looking at Chinese knots, I did get that vibe with some of the shapes that they made. But yeah.
Yeah, if you're not looking on your phone when I'm talking about Chinese knotting, just to give you a visual, it has a very Celtic vibe to it.
Right. It's like symmetrical, you know.
Yeah. And kind of square in a way. So as time went on, Chinese knotting evolved from folklore to an acceptable art form in Chinese society. Basic knots began being used to embellish everyday objects like sachets, purses, fan tassels, glasses cases, rosaries. And these knots were ways to express love and luck within family members, between lovers, and between friends. And as of the 1970s, however, knowledge and interest in Chinese knotting has declined considerably. This is, these things come in and out of fashion, especially with like industrialization, commercialism. But nevertheless, those that are interested in preserving the art form have been doing so, and you may be able to see the traditional craft at festivals and community markets today. I have seen these knots when I've gone to like various Chinatowns.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I also watch a lot of Chinese dramas, and I've seen them in these Chinese dramas as well. It's very, 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 very pretty, and I want one, but I don't know if I can have one. You know what I mean?
Well,
to each their own.
Right.
Makes me want to try macrame, honestly.
I know, but it's kind of like, I don't know. I'm so committed. There's so many things I want to be doing more with crochet that it's like,
I know.
Stop
I need to
try to learn something else. Just like keep doing crochet because there's so many things to do. But I keep getting shown like knitting patterns. But I'm like, I'm not going to learn how to knit.
No,
I already tried to learn and it's awful. No offense to any knitters out there, but that's not for me.
I agree. Crochet was life-changing because I've always wanted to be able to like do some sort of fiber art. But when I learned knitting, it was like impossibly hard. Like my tension, I'm too tense of a person, so my tension is just too tight. And crochet is like a lot more flexible with tension.
Yeah. No, that was my issue with knitting. It was like everything was so tight around the needle, I could barely get anything in. It was horrible. And I was like pushing down on the needles, and it was poking my fingers, and it just.
Watching Alex knit is insane because she's not tight at all. She's as tight as she needs to be.
She's an extremely loose knitter. She always says that. She really does. But
her stuff looks great. Are you kidding?
Yeah. The one thing, though, I will say is I feel like it's easier to knit without looking than crochet without looking. Because like knit, you're just like doing the next loop that's coming up on the needle versus crochet. It's a little more like, you got to make sure that you're crocheting into the right stitch. But
exactly.
I mean, she knits and reads at the same time.
She's crazy. She's crazy. Yarn with crochet too. Like if you've got a big fluffy yarn or like really dark yarn, you gotta be looking at it.
Yeah, and you need like a light shining right on it.
I know. I got my headlamp, and I'm like, all right, I look crazy when I'm crocheting. Yeah. But maybe I'll get Matt to do some macrame. We were talking about it on our walk yesterday, and he was like, maybe when we're at the cottage, we can. If I find some rope or something, I'm like, yes.
Well, those little mushrooms that you got us from Maine. Are those macrame?
They are.
Those are really cute.
Isn't that cute? I think she just does like a cord. Like she like makes it like a long length and then she wound it up into the shape of a mushroom. They're like little charms that we're hanging on our mirrors. It's very cute.
Yeah.
Well, oh, Lord.
What happened?
That was my medication alarm. I got to take my medication.
I was going to say, did you, because if anyone's watching on YouTube, you may have noticed that I seemed very concerned over here. Something on my desk. There was a spider on my desk and I had to kill it. I normally don't like to kill spiders, but it's like you stay up there, then you're fine. Yeah. Like we agree on that. But it's like you're coming down here on my desk, like walking on my stuff. I just don't know. I don't know. I feel bad about it now, but
I feel bad. I feel bad too, but I have come a long way with spiders, okay? It used to be, if a spider was 800 feet away from me, Matt would go have to kill it, because I can't be in the same mile with a spider. Now, I can coexist with them if they stay in their corners and they stay in their little hidey holes. But if they're coming within, I can touch you distance, I'm sorry. I'm still working on a lot of myself internally, and I'm not ready for this yet, so.
Right. And that's fair. Oh, now I feel bad about it. It's on camera too. Just heartless. Anyway,
you're not
sorry to end on such a low note, everyone.
You did what you must.
If you want to talk to us, you can find us on Twitter at The Good Eve Girls,
or Instagram at The Good Evening Girls,
or TikTok at The Good Eve Girls.
And in the meantime, keep curious. As always, we likely will not be back next week. So
we definitely won't.
Oh, we definitely won't. I was just trying to give it to him easy.
You have to be honest with them.
You're right. I'm going to be honest. We're not going to be back next week. Apologies. I'm traveling. Yeah, but we will be back soon with more information right here.
With more topics. It's nice for us to take a break.
Every once in a while.
Come back. Take a break every 2 episodes. Look, people, we do what we can. But anyways, we love you guys. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.